or as they say in London, controversy between,
Governor. I love your English accent.
Well, that was
Hello and welcome to episode 29 of Rockstar CMO FM. The M is for marketing, the F is for, well, you decide. As you're probably asking yourself, does the world need another effing marketing podcast? I'm your host, Ian Truscott, founding editor of Rockstar CMO, your monthly dose of marketing street knowledge. You can find us at rockstarcmo.com or at rockstarcmo on Twitter and LinkedIn. And if email is your jam and you want to get in touch, I'm editor at rockstarcmo.com. This episode was recorded on Friday, the 25th of September. I don't know about you, but I have no idea where the summer went. It's October next week. But whatever month it is, I'm glad you're here. And I hope you've had a good week, you're staying safe, well, and as sane as you feel you need to be. This week, I'm going to stray a little bit from the normal set list. Normally, I dip into the virtual pages of Rockstar CMO and suggest something you might like, but in a moment, I'm going to share something else that I like this week. In the interview segment, I'm chatting to John Pawlik, the MD of Mantra Media Limited, who was introduced to me as an interesting bloke I should speak to. And I think you'll agree. And again, we wind down from the week in the virtual Rockstar CMO bar with my friend and content marketing guru, Robert Rose. Right, let's get started, shall we? While I would still like to encourage you to take a look at our little publication, in particular the latest issue that you can find on our homepage at rockstarcmo.com, I thought I'd share something else that got my attention this week for a change. What I want to share is from the Marketing Book Podcast by Douglas Burdett and last week's episode that featured the book Purple Goldfish 2 by Stan Phelps. Apologies if you follow me on social media, as you may have seen me reference this already, as I posted it on my blog in my regular Tuesday 2 Cent series, but I really liked it, thought I'd share it here. Stan Phelps has written 7 books, all titled with different colours of goldfish, that focus on different aspects of business, marketing and sales. The bit of the interview I listened to that I want to focus on here is why the goldfish? Well, for a change, this isn't that old hackneyed rubbish and untrue reference to our apparent diminishing attention span. It seems Stan Phelps has this mild goldfish obsession, as there are 5 reasons why some goldfish are tiny and the biggest can grow to be over 2 feet long. And as he explains, the size of your goldfish depends on the following, and it's an excellent business growth analogy. The first is the size of the bowl, how big your market is. The second is the number of other fish, how many competitors you have. The third is the quality of the water, the business environment in which we all operate. The fourth is the first 4 months of the fish's life. So this would be our foundations as a startup, or the success of a new product launch, or how good a start we really got off to. And the fifth is the genetic makeup of the fish. So that'd be our company differentiation. And when I shared this on LinkedIn, Stan Phelps, the author, commented, pointing out that number 5 is the only one we can change, differentiation, how we differentiate ourselves from our competitors. And that's why I thought I'd share that here on our little marketing podcast, as that's our job. Anyway, if you're not already a fan, I think you'll like the Marketing Book Podcast. Douglas has some great guests, including Robert Rose, who I'll be chatting to in a bit. I will, of course, include a link to it in the show notes, although I must warn you that it's not good for you if, like me, you have a marketing book buying problem. Right, on to the interview. I was recently introduced to John Pawlik by Phil Lewis, who regular listeners might remember as the corporate punk we featured on episode 23 and 24. Phil introduced Johnny as an interesting guy who runs a properly ethically led agency, has a really interesting point of view about the application of Japanese business philosophy in a Western context, and he's a provocative and interesting bloke. That's what it said in the email. And he was right. I really enjoyed the chat. John Pawlik is the founder and CEO of the international branding and marketing firm Mantra Media. With over 20 years of experience in branding, marketing and strategy, Johnny has consulted with the European Parliament, the Tokyo Metropolitan Government, British Members of Parliament, the NHS, the UKTI, and a plethora of others. He has featured on Good Morning Britain, the BBC Political Debates, BBC Radio, Osaka Radio, Asahi Shimbun, and many others. Over the last 10 years, Johnny has had his strategies implemented by governmental, private, and charity sectors in North America, South Africa, Western Europe, Southeast Asia, and Australia. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hi, Johnny. Welcome to Rockstar CMO FM. How are you?
Really well, thank you. Thanks for having me, Ian.
No, you're very welcome. Now, for people that aren't familiar with you, obviously I introduced you before we started the interview. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your agency.
So I'm the CEO of Mantra Media, which is an international agency based in the UK and Japan. We currently operate on various national and international campaigns, but also do a lot of the domestic stuff as well. So helping charities, small businesses, and quite recently over the last 6 months, lots of micro businesses and independent consultants create sustainability and then scalability in their different organizations.
Well, that sounds interesting. And you're based in Sheffield, right, here in the UK?
Yes. Well, it's funny you say that. Because I'm usually on a train or a plane. And this is the longest period, I think, probably since I was a child that I've been stationary. So
Yeah. So you've learned a lot more about your hometown.
Well, yes. Sheffield is a wonderful place, and Yorkshire, obviously a beautiful county to live in.
Yeah.
As they say, God's own county. So yes, it's. I'm very lucky just because of the amount of nature and countryside and everything else here.
Nice.
It's a good place to be.
So it sounds beautiful. And for people that don't know, your part of the world is a wonderful, wonderful place. And so what led you to become a marketer and then found your own agency?
So the story goes back over 20 years. So I grew up in quite a challenging place. I'm a working class lad. I grew up on a council estate in the Midlands. And the internet came about, and I thought, this is interesting. And I was quite a geeky, astute youngster. So I clocked on very early that the internet could be a mode of democratization of opportunity. So from the age of, I think it was about 15, I started using things like Bebo and MySpace and a few others to try and, I guess, elevate my social status and to try and create opportunities for myself. And one of the things I did is about 20 years ago, I was promoting bands and artists in America, some parts of Eastern Europe and the UK. And what I found is I could build these communities in, obviously it wasn't common parlance at the time, but social media.
Yeah.
And these strategies that I used 20 years ago about seeing the metrics as people that you need to communicate with in a consistent and considered way. And now the things that people are going, we should be doing this 2 decades on. So that's how it all started.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, because obviously we have the name Rockstar CMO. How many people? I mean, there are two groups of people, it seems. Well, there's more, obviously, but many people we speak to either came from a tech background or have some kind of connection to the music industry in their past that I never realized until we start chatting on something like this. And it's really interesting because I think that growing a community around a band, it seems to be a great marketing lesson.
I 100% agree. I mean, I was on a conversation yesterday with somebody from Poland, and we were talking about the work that we've both done. Excuse me. About consulting with chambers of commerce around the world.
Yeah.
And she says, I'm from Poznan. And I was like, that's interesting, because back in 1999, I did a week of gigs in Poznan. And it was a place called the Blue Note Jazz Club in Poznan, where I was gigging there. And she was like, really? And we worked out that she was a student at that time, and she was probably there at one of the nights that, that I was performing on stage. So it was quite a cool connection.
Yeah. So what do you play? What was your position in the band?
It's always anything with strings. So started on guitar, bass, violin for a while, picked up cello about 10 years ago. So I'm a huge fan of string instruments.
Nice. There's definitely a place for you in our band. I think that I think we've got people that can play keyboards that are regular contributors to Rockstar CMO. So we probably need a singer and somebody on drums. So I'll look for those people. I'll look for those people on the podcast. So we kind of touched a little bit on the fact that you've not been able to travel, and both of us were chatting before I hit record about we're spending more time in our local coffee shops and stuff now. How and you mentioned that previous to this you're traveling a lot. So how has your agency adapted during the pandemic, and what are you seeing with your customers and the market?
So we started doing contingency planning back in February. The end of February, we started to go, there's something going on in the world. Yeah. And then we just thought, you know what? We're going to give. We're just going to give loads of value to people and support them as much as possible. Yeah. And that's kind of part of our philosophy is, if we help people, we hope that they'll reciprocate. So throughout the lockdown in the UK, we started interviewing a lot of our clients who are psychotherapists, psychologists, counselors, and trainers to try and give value to the business community that's more about resilience, cultural support, all that kind of stuff that keeps people in the right headspace to be effective and healthy. I gave away lots of my time to organizations to say, look, something's coming. You need to be resilient. You need to be thinking about change management, being transformative, looking at diversifying your current business model. Tell me if you need a chat. And I think all that support led to a lot of people going, do you know what? You've really helped us keep our heads above water. We want to help you. So that was our strategy throughout lockdown, was just let's help as many people as we can. And what we found was, and lots of people will be telling you this, is that throughout this time period, people have gone, we really need to get our act together as far as our digital estates. A lot of even the older big brands and a lot of the traditional industries just really don't put the importance on their digital estate, and now they realise that it's pertinent or fundamental to survival. It's created a lot more work for us.
Right. And one of the things that and I like that approach. I mean, that's something that's come through in many of the interviews that I've been doing, where we've been talking about the pandemic and how the best brands have reacted of having that empathy for their customers, and you've done it in a sort of micro way, really, with your individual clients.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we put out, I'd say there's a mixture of a macro and a micro level of giving, the podcast series, that we promoted out to, everybody we work with internationally, and everyone has access to that. Our monthly mailers have been kind of a big part of that as well. Just trying to get try and give as much value as far as interviewing people who can give solid advice as well. So it's been fundamental to us just to support people as much as possible.
And I was going to ask you about that, how you were actually sharing that knowledge that you were picking up. So it sounds so you've got your podcast and your weekly updates. How do you find the podcast?
The podcast series has been really, really interesting. We've had some fantastic speakers. One of our clients is the head of Tokyo Counselling Services, who is the first British registered psychoanalyst in Japan.
Wow.
And going more in depth into personal stories with people like that has been phenomenal. We're very lucky at Mantra. We get to work with some incredible human beings that I think offer a lot of value that sometimes they don't even realize.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, right. So I'll include a link to, tell us about your podcast. I'll include a link to it in the show notes. Where can people find it?
So if they go to our website, www.mantrahq.com, we've got on there the Entrepreneur series and the Learning from Leaders series.
Right.
Go in there. I mean, we've got loads of tools and little bits on our website just for people to... we've got an SEO tool on there that people can use, and they don't have to fill in a form.
Right.
Put details in it. It's just, if we can give value and say, look, this might help you, go and use it. We don't, we just want you to. I think it's that thing of, the whole business community globally is struggling right now, and people are in difficult positions. And I just think as marketers, we have a lot of power to influence and transform perception. So, I think there is a bit of onus on us to give value wherever we can and just support that community.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And you mentioned just a moment ago your connection or a connection with Japan, and you've got a presence out there. What are you learning from that? How does that? Do you sort of is the UK business educating the Japanese business? Do you bring stuff back from there? How does that work together?
So it's cultural consistency across the sites. So we wanted to make sure that any of our team working in the UK or Japan, when they go from one country to another, it just feels like the same culture. And it is the same culture because it's based on the same values and ethics. But I'll give you an example. So in our Kyoto office, as you walk in, you change into your slippers instead of your outside shoes. We do the same in Sheffield.
Oh, wow.
So, in Sheffield, we've got this 300-year-old building opposite the train station, which is a beautiful piece of old architecture. And, even though you've got this huge, quirky old building, people are, doing the same stuff they'd be doing in Japan. Nice. So culturally, we've tried to keep things as consistent as possible. I mean, we've learned a lot about process and structure from Japan. They're very methodical and consistent in how they produce things, which is why you get that quality of production from Japan. Whether they're making watches or furniture or anything else, people always say, Japanese design is incredible. Best in the world, and that's what we've applied in Mantra.
Right. And so you've applied that to your work and practices with your UK clients then, that process element.
Yeah. Globally. I mean, when we toured Australia, we did 4,500 kilometers in a month in Australia, traveling with the Invictus athletes for a global campaign we did around PTS. I mean, that we had the same structures and processes, and for some clients, that can be a challenge because they're used to marketers, say, somebody need a brand, they kind of, lick the finger and kind of test where the wind's blowing.
I don't know what you're talking about.
But it's that thing, we do a lot of research. So when people come to us, we do market research reports, we do qual, quant, audience listening, all that kind of stuff. So that the decisions that we make around how to market a business or a charity or even do a national campaign for a government, it's all research demographically backed rather than just guesswork, which for me just is common sense. But, that's that joke about common sense, right? It's just not common.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. And we sort of, because marketing is creative, we think the way that we should manage the projects should be creative, I guess, as well, rather than follow the process. But I like
Well,
that, Johnny.
it's that old series. I don't even remember that old TV series called Monkey Dust.
No.
So it was a cartoon. I think it was on Channel 4, or I think it was for about 10, 15 years ago. And there was this marketing firm that would come up with campaigns around new car names.
Mm-hmm.
And the creative would be sent to like some kind of faraway jungle where he'd have to live off, the land and do all kinds of weird rituals and stuff. And then in some kind of hazy moment, drug-induced moment, he'd come up with the name for a new kind of a car maker.
Yes.
And it was kind of, that was the process, which I always thought was quite funny.
Yeah. And sometimes you think that's really what's happening.
Yes.
So I'm gonna come to our final question, Johnny. As we've already discussed, right, on Rockstar CMO, we have this concept of the swimming pool where we chuck all the snake oil bullshit and all the bits that we don't like about this industry that we love in, with the hope they'll never come back. Often with some entertaining results. What is it that you would throw into the swimming pool about marketing that you don't like?
Gosh, there's so much.
I always get that reaction. There's so much.
Well, it's why I've got so much skin in the game. It's why I came into marketing, because I saw all these psychological techniques and the power of influence, and said, you know what, can we use this? Can we use this for good things and creating good things in the world rather than just commodifying everything?
Yeah.
I think something that is always quite silly and somewhat immature and childish, which I'd love to stop, is acronym posturing. You get to a meeting and people try and test each other, don't they? So they'll start speaking in acronyms rather than just speak. And we've had this before where, we've been hired by a CEO of quite a large firm, and then we've been passed down to the marketing manager, and the marketing manager's, what's this digital agency going to be like? Are they going to, step on my toes? So you'll start the meeting with, we're going to just jump in with lots of random acronyms that aren't useful in that moment. And I'll go, and I'm always thinking, when you've been in the industry for 20 years, it doesn't really work. I think posturing.
So the rubbish posturing acronyms are the thing we need to just chuck into the Rockstar swimming pool.
Yeah, that would be that.
I love it. So we talked a little bit about where people can find your podcast and your website. What about finding you, Johnny? If we spin the dial on the interwebs, where might we find Johnny?
Well, I've done a lot of media this week, as you've seen, in newspapers and magazines and things, which is always wonderful and appreciated. I think if they go to mantrahq.com, if they go on LinkedIn, so LinkedIn, I think it's / Mantra Marketing. They can find me on LinkedIn. I think.
Do you tweet? Are you much of a Twitterer?
No. So
LinkedIn's the place to be.
Yeah, I know it's always the straightest line. I know a lot of CEOs, especially marketing, want to create a personal brand. And they want 1 million Instagram followers, feed something, and I think for me that only serves a particular type of purpose that doesn't interest me.
Okay.
So for me, LinkedIn, if people want to connect with me personally and just have a chat, then LinkedIn is the place to find me.
All right.
I tend to stay away from personal accounts on
Okay. Well, that's splendid. I'll include a link to your LinkedIn account in the show notes, plus the link to your website and the podcast you discussed. It's been a pleasure, Johnny. Hope you enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks ever so much, Ian. Really
you're very welcome. Thanks for joining us. Cheers. Thank you, Johnny. I will, of course, include all the links to him and his agency in the show notes. I really enjoyed chatting to Johnny before and after we hit record. Phil was right in his introductory email. An interesting bloke. Right, it's Friday evening here at the Rockstar CMO penthouse in London. I'm about ready to call it a day and ease my way into the weekend with a trip to the Rockstar CMO virtual bar and join my friend and content marketing guru, Robert Rose. Good evening, Robert. What are you drinking?
Oh, hello, my friend. Nice to virtually see you here in the bar, which is where, strangely, you always find me here in the bar, which is, I'm not sure what that says about me, quite frankly.
You just like piano music.
You know, here's the thing. The drink I have this week is, I don't really have a name for it. It's just a great. So I'm a huge fan. This is what makes my Scottish grandfather and my mother, who was also from Glasgow, and from and my that whole side of my family is from Glasgow, makes them roll over in their graves because I prefer Irish whiskey to Scotch whiskey.
Oh my God!
And yes, I
might have to end the show right
sacrilegious. It's absolutely sacrilegious. So, but
no politics on the show, Robert.
Yeah, that is. I'm just going to say it. I prefer Irish whiskey for the most part.
All right.
And I'm particular to Jameson. And this is Jameson's Black Barrel whiskey, which is just an affordable yet, on the higher end.
Nice.
And it's just simple. It's just basically a Jameson Black Barrel whiskey with a healthy squeeze of lemon and a little bit of cranberry bitters, which gives it a sweetness. And it's just a lovely, lovely drink.
And it's unchristened.
I do not have a name for it. I mean, I don't. There's not much in it other than the bit. I guess it's kind of an old fashioned if you really want to get to the bitters part of it. But it's lemon, not orange, and all that. So I'm not sure what to call it.
That's an interesting mix. Let me just have a look at my desktop bar, see what I have here. And the range I have in front of me is going to shock you, Robert, because I have a very similar drink in that it is from the Great British Isles. And it's because I can't say the UK, right? Because you said Irish whiskey. And it's Hendrick's gin.
Yeah.
Splendid. Let me just
I'm not,
pour myself
and I'm not, with gin. Well, and I know gin is also very big in Ireland as well.
Yes.
But you don't
big
get
the
a lot
world
of
over,
British
mate.
whiskey, or English whiskey, I should say.
No. We've started making stuff more now, but and ice. Did you put ice into that?
Oh yes,
Seems by ice.
Indeed.
Yeah. All right, splendid.
A big rock.
And then there was,
but otherwise, ice.
If I have it, I don't even have the right drink, fella. So let me see. I've got some. What was it you put in there? Bitters.
Bitters, it's cranberry bitters actually, but orange bitters would be fine as well.
Bitters. All right. Well, I've got tonic, which is
that's
which is
not
a bit bitter,
but yes, it's
it has bit. It is a bitter flavour, isn't it?
A little bit, yeah. It does.
Let me try this. Let me see. Oh, that's nice. That's nice, Robert. I think your family would be proud. I
don't think they would be. No, they would be. they would be yelling at me right now. My grandfather, in his very thick Glaswegian brogue, would be telling me he's going to give me the shit hide.
Good Lord! Yeah. Well, the good thing is neither of us would be able to understand a bloody word he's saying. So maybe. Which all of my Scottish listeners have just turned off. So that was delicious, and often I remember to ask you what the name of the drink was, and this time it has no name. That's interesting. So maybe
it does not have a name yet. we might as well call it the Rockstar CMO because it does not have any. does not have.
You
any
wouldn't
name.
do that. Name one of your cocktails after our little show. That's amazing. And has it featured in hashtag Friday Concoction yet?
It has indeed. It has indeed been featured there, and it did not have a name when I did it.
Wow. Did anybody suggest a name, or just your family?
No one did. No.
Just your whole family unfriended you on every channel.
Well.
So I'm wondering, where would you go with something like this? Where are we drinking these this week?
Well, the sort of, the obvious place would be to go somewhere in Ireland, somewhere where you could also go without a passport. But I would actually take us for this drink. And I do have a longing for this. This is some place I've wanted to get back to for since we've been in lockdown, which is I would want to get to the outskirts of Paris, on some winery somewhere, and it's kind of that cool gray, raining a little bit, kind of cold, but sitting in a cafe or sitting in a hotel bar, looking out at the winery and sipping on this would be just delightful.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? I mean, you're talking about the outskirts of Paris, but even on a rainy day, Paris is still a beautiful place to be, isn't it?
Oh, it's just, it's absolutely.
It actually adds something to the romance, the drama. A rainy evening, and you're in one of those little cafes.
It does, and
it's
the
really
smells
nice.
Inside, where you've got, baked things happening, and the smell of the inside of a bar and all of that is just it's pretty great.
I love the smell of an inside of a bar. You can't really capture the smell of an inside of a bar in a virtual bar, unfortunately. We've only got the tastes. We can only describe the tastes. Well, that sounds really nice. So we're overlooking a vineyard, and we're thinking about marketing because that's what we keep doing. What is it that we'd be chatting about, Robert?
Well, I think, one of the things that I think is interesting, especially in where we find ourselves with, politics and everything that's happening right now, certainly in my country and elsewhere, in marketing is where and when and how should we be controversial, or as they say in London, controversy. Between,
Governor. I love your English accent.
Well, that wasn't an English accent as much as it was trying to put a aluminium into the OU of different kinds of things that the English do. And so I see a lot of brands and get asked this question a lot about, like, how controversial should we be, right? Where should we, and even to the point of where I see some marketing VPs, where they see that as a way to embed, brand or product messaging into the body of, something that will get, talked about, right? Yeah. So they almost do it. They're provocative to be provocative, right? As a way of, in a way, it's like, I don't know if you're familiar with the term of steganography, where so it's embedded messaging in the thing, and this is what this really comes down to. And there's an example of this, of course, which was last year. Where Gillette did this whole campaign around, they called it The Best Men Can Be, and it was trying to address toxic masculinity among young men, and this was during the hashtag Me Too movement. And everybody who said that was a successful effort would say, look how many people talked about it. And everybody who said it was a big fat failure would say, look how many people talked about it. And so the real question in my mind about what determines whether that's successful or not is not how many people talked about it, but who talked about it and what did they talk about? Because in the case of The Best Men Can Be, they didn't talk about, the whole toxic masculinity thing. The whole conversation was, does Procter & Gamble, or more specifically Gillette, even have any business talking about this? And that's not the conversation I'm sure they intended to have, nor is it any sort of relevance of success when you start thinking about all of that basically the big heated discussion was the inside baseball ad professionals, marketing professionals, discussing whether or not they had the right to talk about it or not. And all of that comes down to trust, right? Yeah. It's all about, if you're going to insert yourself into a provocative or controversial topic, you've got to ask yourself whether or not your audience trusts you to have that conversation. And there's actually research on this. There's research that was done by some psychologists who looked at controversy, and what they found was really interesting. They found that there was sort of two sort of countervailing trends here, which was one, they found that more people wanted to talk about more controversial things. In other words, the more controversial, the more people will talk about it. But the more controversial, the less people want to talk about it in public, because they don't want to get called out and they don't want to have a public conversation about it. And so it's interesting. So what that tells me is that the more people that we trust, in other words, if I trust you sitting here in the bar, we can talk about anything, right? We can talk about politics, religion. We can talk about anything controversial because it's a safe place, right? And we'll have the right kind of conversation. But I'm not going to have that same level of trust on social media or on a public forum, so I'm not going to have it. So you have to, when you're trying to figure out whether you should be controversial, the first question I would ask is, does our goal of reaching this audience, do they trust us enough to have this conversation? Because if they don't, we shouldn't be having it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think you're totally right about that trust thing. I mean, and also we encourage brands to be different, don't we? And we encourage brands to define their tribe and to be a little bit more outspoken. But that does start to tread on the toes of country. I mean, we know a MarTech CMO that whenever he was in a job, start picking on his competitors, the bigger the better, right? And that would gain them some notoriety. And so what's so where do you think that line should be drawn? Because the thing I'm sure that you've talked about, certainly I'm not sure whether we've talked about it on here, but certainly is that if you're going to express an opinion that's differentiated, you've got to be willing to deal with the fact that there will be people that disagree with you, but that's okay because you're creating your tribe. Are we treading on the toes of that, or are you talking about being, crazy controversial like the Gillette guys were?
Well, it's a spectrum, right? I mean, so me coming out and saying, planting a flag and saying our competitor isn't good, right? Or has the wrong approach. And so in varying degree, for certainly based on the company, you would think that because we're in that business, because we've been in business as longer, whatever it is, as our competitor, the audience to some degree, is probably going to trust us on that topic, right? In other words, the right conversation will be had. Now, whether we're right or wrong on that, or whether we should do that, based on our brand or based on what we want to stand for, or based on the conversation we want to have, it's a different discussion. But having that's less controversial, right? Than coming out and, for example, saying something about our competitor that says, they have something, they treat women poorly, or, saying something that is really controversial. That we may not have any authority or trust with our audience to have the conversation about, right? And that works as a spectrum in terms of being able to say, we want to stand up for this thing that will get us attention, versus we want to sort of shut up about it, right? We're not going to say anything about it. And there's everything there's everything from the, being very quiet on that and to being very vocal about that. But a great example of this is you look at the difference in the way that the response happened and the discussion happened around Nike and Colin Kaepernick and the whole Black Lives Matter and standing up for the flag. Nike had the conversation that happened was the right conversation. And why was that? It was because Nike's audience has the trust in the brand for them to be able to have that because of their brand, because of what they do. Their audience trusts them enough to have, they may disagree, but they don't, it doesn't seem odd or weird or inauthentic for Nike to actually do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But if Apple or somebody like that did that, who don't have that connection with that community, then it wouldn't have been trusted.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so,
And
so the question is, well, then,
think,
do you have to go down that road, to be able to get there? The answer is, it's a stepped idea, right? In other words, Gillette jumping into the deep end of the pool with the best men can be is probably an unfortunate mistake. However, if they'd stepped into it a little more slowly, maybe it can, it could have worked as a longer term strategy, right? Starbucks learned this as well, right? Starbucks has had many initiatives to try and bring diversity or culture or other controversial quote unquote topics to bear, and with varying degrees of success because they just don't have the trust with that audience to have that conversation.
Yeah, and I think that happened, didn't it, when everybody on social media started blacking out their updates and logos and stuff, and if you scratch the surface, you could quickly see which brands had a diverse board, and that started that whole conversation. So you can be accidentally controversial thinking that you're following the zeitgeist, right?
Well, that's an excellent point, right? Which is, it's not a question of when, if, it's a question of when, right? You're going to be accidentally controversial, right? And having a plan for that, if you have any opinion at all, you're likely at some point, put your foot in your mouth or whatever it is, or someone will put it in your mouth for you, right? Your CEO will say something really stupid, or someone on your, an influencer that you've hired will say something really stupid, or one of your employees will say something really stupid. And you and I have had this conversation, right? With, with Tom Goodwin and he, arguably what Tom did was he didn't, when he got fired from Publicis because of his, his quote unquote controversial statements around COVID and what was going on with priorities, he didn't have that trust with the broader audience. And he certainly didn't have the trust with the broader audience of his employer. And so he, his comments were seen as out of touch and, quite frankly, not appropriate. It's
amazing. It's an interesting fine line, isn't it? Because a lot of people have created their personal brands around mild controversy and being a slight sort of thorn in people's sides, but then you can easily overstep that and become more than a thorn and just become bloody annoying, and all of a sudden it's your tables have turned.
Yeah, it's another great point, which is, there are others who do that, who, for example, for what Tom did or what Procter & Gamble and Gillette did, or, they've they were born that way, right? And you not only expect them to be controversial, you expect it. You expect them to say, and it's weird when they're not part of the conversation. And that can be a differentiator as well, right? It would just be weird for me to come out and on various topics and go, here's the right way. It's like people would be going, what are you talking about?
Or you started swearing.
Even if I had in the background been going to school and gotten educated and gotten all manner of, sort of bona fides in a particular topic, it would be just odd, for me to come out and claim that, and without having built that trust with that audience.
No, it's a good point. And what sort of it started with, you've always got great sort of customer stories, and all of what you talk about comes from your client work. what advice do you give when you're actually asked that? Have you actually been asked that? Why don't we, it's probably some bloke with a loud tie who's got no personality saying to you, why don't we go and do this crazy thing? The guy in the corner. And do you say, well, no, or do you work through that?
Yeah, it's usually, I will tell you, it's usually not something like Gillette asking whether or not they should do something like the best men can be. I mean, that, to be honest, that just, that smells of an agency going, let's do something really, provocative, right? And get media coverage, right? And the cynical side of me says that was as much for the agency as it was for Gillette.
I was going to actually, we could talk about this for a while, because one of the things you mentioned earlier on about that it created a controversy that's inside baseball. I think it's quite interesting how many of these controversies we sort of latch onto being inside baseball, and I sometimes wonder whether the consumer cares and what they think, about some of these things.
I have a great story about that, which is. There was this was a few years ago, it was maybe 5 or 6 years ago, maybe even more than that now. Time flies. I have no sense of time anymore. But there was a time back when McDonald's, the restaurant chain, there was a social media controversy about, I can't remember the hashtag, but it was like McDonald's life or a day at McDonald's or something like that. It was some hashtag with, McDonald's life, basically. And they had launched this hashtag on their social media channels. And basically it turned very quickly into a very toxic thing, because people were posting, a picture of a rat in a restaurant and saying, hashtag McDonald's life, or, a picture of their broken hamburger or whatever, McDonald's life, and it hit all the major ad magazines. It was on the cover of Ad Week. It was on the cover of Ad Age. It was on the, it made all the marketing magazines like, oh, here's your social media fail of the week, right? Interestingly, I actually happened to, not by design, but happened to ask one of the major managers at McDonald's social media strategy about that at a conference that I was at. I said, what is this? How are you dealing with this? And he said, we're not. He said, this is item number 760 on our to-do list. This doesn't even hit the top 10 of our hashtags, right? Consumers don't care about this, right? This is, hashtag Egg McMuffin, hashtag breakfast, hashtag, all this. He said, that's so low on our analytics. Like, we're not even paying attention to it, to be honest with you. He said, the media care and the inside baseball people care. We're not, and it's not that we don't care, but it's just, it's not hitting our radar because it's just not that big. So, and they had the analytics that just showed that the consumers are just meh, whatever. Yeah, it's a small, it's a very noisy small percentage, that is always going to be out there, and for anything, which is, and it's stuff that they can try and orchestrate, but they certainly can't control it.
Which is it? I mean, that's an interesting nuance, isn't it, on the whole controversy thing, which is where we started, which is actually you might not have been that controversial. The customer may not have cared. You made it onto the front page of Ad Age or whatever, but who cares?
Right.
So
I mean, which is,
well done, you.
From a PR perspective, the poor PR manager who has to deal with that and go, oh gosh, I got to go, have a response for this and get a quote for it. And, all that stuff. It's an annoyance in their day, but it doesn't ultimately affect their long-term strategy. And this is, this is one of those things in today's world where, yes, there are times when we are, to your earlier point, where we're purposely provocative, and as I was mentioning, it's rare that a brand comes to me anyway and says, hey, how can we poke the bear, as it were, how can we do something really controversial and talk about, Trump or politics or religion or something like that. They never do that. What they say is usually something like what we were talking about in the very beginning of this conversation, which is, hey, should we make a claim on our competitor, or should we say something, something controversial for our industry, headless CMS isn't all that in a bag of chips. And it's like, something,
heresy,
right? Something where the audience is going to go, ooh, they're picking a fight. That's more of the provocative nature. And and then my answer is always the same, which is, how much do they trust you to have that conversation? If they do, and it fits in your brand and it fits in your strategy, let's go do it. Right. Let's go have that conversation.
Yeah. No, that's great. A really nice conversation. Thank you, Robert. And a wonderful drink and a wonderful spot that you've chosen for us. And we'll, hang on. Have you written about this before?
I have.
Forgotten most.
You can see a little bit more about this, although it doesn't go into much more depth than we've gone into here, on my lovely little website called contentadvisory.net.
Splendid. And when the listeners spin the dial on the interwebs, where will they find you?
They will find me at Robert_Rose on Twitter, and whatever LinkedIn does with /in/ whatever. Yes. Just do a search. You'll find me.
Splendid. Thank you very much, Robert. And will I find you again in the virtual Rockstar CMO bar?
You'll always find me in the bar, apparently, yes.
Just the kind of man I like. Thank you very much, Robert. I'll see you next week.
Yes, you will.
Cheers, buddy. Thank you, Robert. Are you now inspired to get controversial? Let us know what you think of that conversation or anything else you've heard on the episode so far. So that's a wrap on episode 29 of the Rockstar CMO Effing Marketing Podcast. Thanks again to Johnny, to Robert, and to Douglas Burdett for his marketing book podcast that I referenced earlier. But most of all, thank you for dropping a dime into your podcasting jukebox, selecting our track and jiving along with us. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you like my guests, please give them a mention, click on their links, follow them, and take a look at their work. I really appreciate their time, so please show them some love and tell them I sent you. So does the world need another effing marketing podcast? I'd love to know what you think. Drop us some feedback, a review, subscribe, share, or just keep listening. I'm glad you're here. Next week, I again use this podcast as an opportunity to chat to someone interesting as I meet Eric Fulweiler, who helped build Vanna Media for Gary Vaynerchuk and is now Chief Commercial Officer at 11FS, a technology and content agency focused on the very hot financial services space. And Robert will undoubtedly be back in the bar. Until then, I've been your host, Ian Truscott, founding editor of RockstarCMO.com, and I hope you'll join us again next week here at Rockstar CMO FM.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Christy Heiler hosts a fantastic podcast called Own It. Christy, tell us more about the show.
Own It is all about celebrating women and non-binary advertising agency owners. We talk about buying out of the boys' club of advertising because less than 1% of ad agencies are owned by women.
And where can people subscribe?
You can find the podcast at untilyouownit.com. We're also on the Marketing Podcast Network at marketingpodcast.net. And of course, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard her. Go subscribe. This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.